Alone, we can do so little. Together, we can do so much. Helen Keller, hello, friends. Today, I want to talk to you about a principle so powerful, it can revolutionize your relationships, your business, your family, and your legacy. That principle is synergy. Synergy isn't just teamwork. It's not compromise. It's not putting up with each other. It's the creation of something entirely new and better. Something none of us could have done alone. When we synergize, 1 + 1 is not 2. It's 3 or 10 or 100. It's infinite. When we talk about synergy, we begin with the most foundational principle of all, valuing differences. This is not just about being polite or politically correct. It's about seeing difference as strength, not threat. Most of us, if we're honest, are uncomfortable with difference. We naturally gravitate toward those who think like us, act like us, vote like us, believe like us. It feels safe. It feels validating. But the truth is there's no growth in sameness, no innovation, no real progress. Synergy begins when we stop merely tolerating differences and start intentionally seeking them out, embracing them, and using them to build something better than we could on our own. Think about it. Every great breakthrough in history has come from people who brought something new to the table, something no one else had. That only happens when people with different perspectives come together. In business, in marriage, in community, it's the differences that create the spark. But instead, we often treat differences like static. We shut down, we argue, we dig in our heels, and we lose the gift of another perspective. Synergy calls us to reverse that instinct, to lean in when we feel discomfort, to get curious instead of defensive, to ask, what do you see that I might be missing? I remember consulting with a tech company that was stuck. They had an incredible product, brilliant engineers, and a strong vision, but something wasn't clicking. Morale was low, turnover was high, and innovation had stalled. When I got in the room with their leadership team, I immediately saw the issue. It wasn't lack of talent. It was lack of diversity, not in race or gender, although those were factors, but in thinking. They all had similar educational backgrounds. They all had worked their way up through the same industry. They had built an echo chamber. And even though they were competent, they were blind to what they didn't know. We brought in 3 people from outside the tech world: a school principal, a jazz musician, and a nonprofit director. Not because they knew software development, but because they knew people, patterns, and empathy. In the first meeting, the musician suggested something that made everyone chuckle. It was out of left field, but it unlocked a creative idea that turned into a new product feature. A few months later, that feature became their best performing asset, all because they allowed difference to become part of the equation. Now I want to turn that mirror to you. How do you handle difference? When your partner sees life through a different lens, do you dismiss it or dig deeper? When a coworker challenges your approach, do you shut down or ask questions? When your child has an opinion that surprises or frustrates you, do you correct them or connect with them? We all say we value difference, but real valuing shows up in the moment of tension, when it would be easier to retreat than to engage. I'll never forget a moment I had with my son when he was 15. We were driving home from school, and I asked him about a project he was working on. He started explaining his approach, and honestly, it sounded scattered to me. My instinct was to jump in, to correct him, to show him a better way. But something told me to wait, to really listen. So I did. And what I heard, when I got past my assumptions, was a strategy that was creative, relevant, and entirely his own. If I had spoken too soon, I would have shut down that spark. But by choosing to value his difference, even when it didn't match my expectations, I got to witness growth. And so did he. Valuing difference is more than a technique. It's a mindset. It's the humility to say, I don't have the full picture. It's the courage to admit, I might be wrong. And it's the wisdom to understand that truth often lives in the space between perspectives. That's where synergy begins. Not when everyone agrees, but when we bring our disagreements to the table with respect and curiosity, and let something bigger emerge. So here's what I want to challenge you with. This week, find someone who sees the world differently. Maybe it's a coworker who rubs you the wrong way. Maybe it's a family member whose beliefs challenge yours. Maybe it's a new employee who isn't your type. Don't just tolerate them. Engage them. Ask them questions. Listen without preparing your rebuttal. Look for the gold in their perspective. You don't have to agree with everything they say. But if you listen well enough, you just might learn something that could change your own world. That's the beginning of synergy. That's where the magic happens. Synergy cannot exist in an environment dominated by defensiveness. When people enter conversations, meetings, or relationships with their guard up, they aren't really listening. They're preparing to protect, to defend, to win. And when everyone is in defense mode, synergy is impossible. We don't create, we compete. We don't build, we barricade. The second key to unlocking synergy is shifting from a defensive mindset to a creative one. It sounds simple, but it requires deep self-awareness and emotional maturity, because defense is rooted in fear, and fear, if not examined, will keep us trapped in scarcity thinking, believing that if the other person is right, I must be wrong. If they succeed, I must lose. That's the lie. The truth is, synergy begins when we move from defending our positions to creating shared solutions. Think about a time you were in a heated conversation. Maybe it was with your boss, your spouse, or a friend. What happened inside you? Did your shoulders tense up? Did your thoughts race to justify your stance? Did you interrupt or mentally prepare your counter-argument before they finished speaking? That's defense mode. It's not necessarily hostile, but it's reactive, and it blocks understanding. It blocks learning. But now think of a time when someone disarmed you, not by overpowering you, but by leaning in with curiosity. When someone said, "Help me understand," instead of, "Let me explain why you're wrong." That creates an entirely different environment, an environment where creativity can thrive. I once worked with two department heads in a large healthcare organization who couldn't seem to see eye to eye. Every meeting between them was a chess match. One would present a plan, and the other would shoot holes in it. The tension had become so toxic that their teams avoided collaboration entirely. The CEO brought me in to mediate. After hearing them both, it was clear they weren't bad people. They weren't incompetent. They were just stuck in defense mode. Both were afraid of being steamrolled. Both wanted to protect their people, their credibility, their track record. But in doing so, they had stopped listening. They were just trading monologues and calling it communication. So I brought them into a room, no formal agenda, and I said, "Today, we're not defending. We're designing. Whatever has happened up to this point, we're letting it go. Let's pretend this is day one, and you're building this system together. What does it look like?" At first, there was hesitation. Old habits don't die easy. But then one of them looked up and said, "Well, if I could start from scratch, I'd want a scheduling system that doesn't punish nurses for being human." The other paused, then said, "I've actually been trying to solve that too, but I thought you didn't care." That was the moment. The shift. They moved from proving to improving, from defending to designing. And within a week, their teams were piloting a new collaborative model that reduced errors by 25%. We can all make that shift, but we have to want something more than being right. We have to want truth, connection, progress. When you shift from defensive to creative, the people around you feel it immediately. Your energy changes. You become more open, more curious, more inviting, and people naturally respond in kind. They stop bracing themselves and start sharing ideas. They stop hiding and start contributing. That's where synergy is born. I had a moment like this with my daughter during her senior year of high school. We were arguing, again, about college applications. I thought she was being passive. She thought I was being controlling. We kept circling the same argument, each trying to prove our point. Until one night, I caught myself mid-sentence. I took a breath, and I said, "I'm sorry. I think I've been more focused on convincing you than understanding you. Can we start over? She looked at me with surprise. And then she exhaled. She said, Dad, I'm scared. What if I'm not ready? That conversation changed everything. Once I stopped defending my position as a parent, I was able to hear her heart. And together, we found a way forward that neither of us could have created alone. This is what I want for you. This week, when you feel your defenses rising, pause. Recognize that moment. Instead of clinging tighter to your position, ask a better question. Try, what could we build together if we weren't arguing? Say, I'm open to a new solution. Watch what happens. Because when you stop defending and start creating, you're not just opening the door to synergy. You're walking through it. And that's where transformation begins. One of the biggest barriers to synergy is the human tendency to become defensive. It happens so quickly, so automatically, that most of the time we don't even realize it. Someone questions our idea, and suddenly we're explaining ourselves, justifying every detail, holding our ground. Someone offers a different opinion, and before we even hear them out, we're already mentally formulating a rebuttal. That's how most conflict begins. Not with intention, but with reaction. We feel threatened, even subtly, and we move to protect our ego, our expertise, our credibility. The problem is, when everyone is defending, no one is creating. Nothing new is being born. It becomes a tug of war, where both sides are pulling harder and harder, thinking that the harder they pull, the more likely they'll win. But synergy doesn't happen in tug of war. It happens when people drop the rope and start building together. I remember sitting in a strategy session with a nonprofit team working on a major community initiative. Tensions were high. Deadlines were looming. Everyone was passionate, but the meetings had become battlegrounds. You could feel it in the room. People weren't listening to understand. They were listening to respond. One of the program directors presented a proposal, and immediately another leader jumped in, pointing out the flaws. Then the first one snapped back, defending every choice, explaining why the other didn't understand the context. Around the table, you could see people withdrawing, shrinking into silence, checking out mentally. No synergy, just survival. So I called for a pause. I asked a simple question: what are we trying to protect here? And what are we trying to create? At first, there was quiet. Then someone spoke up. I think I've been trying to protect my team's work. We've put so much into this. I just don't want it dismissed. Another added, and I've been trying to create a smoother process because my staff is burning out. Suddenly, the atmosphere shifted. We weren't opponents. We were allies with different concerns, different angles, both valid, both important. The energy turned from resistance to exploration. That moment of dropping the defenses opened the door to something new. It's in our nature to defend what we've built. Our ideas, our work, our vision. They feel like extensions of ourselves. So when someone criticizes them, it feels personal. But if we can recognize that impulse and not act on it, we unlock a new level of communication. We begin to operate from a place of creativity instead of combat. Defense says, I need to protect my point. Creation says, let's find a better way. Defense tries to win. Creation tries to grow. When you make that shift, you start to see people not as obstacles, but as collaborators. Even in disagreement, you stay open to the possibility that together, you can arrive at something stronger than either of you could alone. This showed up powerfully in a marriage counseling session I once sat in on. The couple had been arguing about finances for months. One wanted to save aggressively. The other felt suffocated by the restrictions. Every conversation turned into a courtroom. Evidence, accusations, defense. Nothing moved. But when the husband finally said, I think I've been trying to control out of fear. And the wife responded, I've been spending out of a need to feel alive. Something cracked open. They weren't enemies. They were just scared. And once they stopped defending and started revealing, they could begin creating a solution that honored both of their needs. That's the magic of creativity. It doesn't demand that someone lose. It asks, what can we make together that honors both truths? In a creative space, you don't have to let go of your values. You just have to loosen your grip on your method. You stop asking, how can I get them to see it my way? And you start asking, what are we really trying to solve here together? And the answers that come from that space are almost always surprising, energizing, and deeply satisfying. This week, I invite you to become aware of when you slip into defense. You'll feel it physically, tight chest, clenched jaw, fast thoughts. When that happens, pause. Ask yourself, am I defending right now or creating? Then take a breath and try a different posture. Try saying, tell me more about what you're seeing. Or, help me understand why that matters to you. That moment of openness may feel vulnerable at first, but it is also incredibly powerful, because it signals to the other person that you are safe, that you are curious, that you are willing. And that's when synergy becomes possible. That's when new ideas emerge. That's when people lean in instead of leaning away. When you choose creativity over defense, you don't just change the conversation. You change the culture. And that changes everything. One of the most profound principles of human connection, and one of the deepest roots of synergy, is learning to seek first to understand, then to be understood. It sounds simple, almost too obvious. Yet, if we're honest, most of us reverse it. We seek to be understood first. We want to make our point, tell our side, explain our logic, defend our actions. And in doing so, we often miss what the other person is truly trying to say. We listen with the intent to reply, not to understand. And that subtle shift in intent changes everything. It closes the door to trust. It closes the door to empathy. And most of all, it closes the door to synergy. Because synergy isn't about persuading someone to your point of view. It's about creating a new point of view together. And that begins with deep, courageous, humble listening. I once worked with a team of senior executives at a Fortune 500 company. Brilliant minds, all of them. But collaboration was breaking down. One of the core issues was that meetings had become battlegrounds for opinions. People were talking over each other, interrupting, defending. Everyone had something to say, but no one really felt heard. So I introduced an exercise. Simple on the surface, but challenging in practice. Before anyone could respond to another person's idea, they had to repeat it back to the other person's satisfaction. That was the rule. No rebuttals. No, I agree, but just reflection, understanding. The shift was almost immediate. At first, there was awkwardness. Some executives stumbled to summarize each other's thoughts. Others realized they hadn't really been paying attention. But then something remarkable happened. As people started truly listening, the tone of the room changed. Defensiveness gave way to openness. Arguments softened into conversations. Ideas started flowing in new, more creative directions. Because once people felt understood, they became more willing to understand. And that right there is the magic of this principle. It creates emotional safety. And emotional safety is the foundation of any high-functioning synergistic team. Now bring that into your personal life. Think about your relationships, your marriage, your children, your friendships. How often do you feel truly understood? Not just heard, not just acknowledged, but deeply understood. It's one of the most powerful emotional experiences a human being can have. And you can give that to someone simply by choosing to set aside your own agenda and listen, not just with your ears, but with your heart. I remember a father who came to me frustrated about his teenage son. They were constantly clashing about grades, chores, curfews, everything. He said, no matter what I say, he shuts down. It's like I'm talking to a wall. I asked him, have you tried not talking? Have you tried just listening? The father looked confused, but he won't tell me anything. So I coached him on how to create the space. No lectures, no advice. Just a simple invitation. Hey, I'd really like to understand how things are going for you lately. I'll just listen. That night, the father sat with his son and asked that question. The boy didn't respond right away, But eventually, the words started coming. Frustrations, fears, pressure he felt. The father said almost nothing, just nodding, asking gentle follow-ups. By the end of the conversation, his son said something he hadn't heard in years. "Thanks for listening, Dad. That really helped." That conversation didn't solve every problem, but it opened a door that had been locked for months. And all it took was the courage to listen. Seeking first to understand doesn't mean you abandon your own voice. It doesn't mean you agree with everything you hear. It means you honor the other person enough to give them the gift of your full presence. It means you step into their shoes, even if just for a moment, and try to see the world through their eyes. And when you do, two things happen. First, you build trust. People feel safe with you. Second, your own influence increases, because once people feel heard, they become far more open to hearing you. There's a story of a negotiator who was sent into one of the most challenging labor disputes in his company's history. Emotions were high. The union leaders were angry, and previous attempts to negotiate had failed. But this man took a different approach. For the first 3 meetings, he didn't propose anything. He just listened. He asked questions. He reflected back what he heard. And by the 4th meeting, something shifted. The other side started saying things like, "Okay, now let's hear your side." Not because they were defeated, but because they felt respected. Because someone had finally taken the time to understand them. And in that environment, real solutions began to emerge. This week, I want to challenge you. In your next important conversation, resist the urge to explain yourself right away. Pause. Ask a question instead. Say, "Can you help me understand what matters most to you in this situation?" Then listen. Not to respond, not to fix, but to truly understand. You may be surprised by what you hear. And more than that, you'll create the kind of connection that can only come when we stop trying to be right and start trying to be real. That is the path to synergy. That is the path to greatness. In every conflict, every disagreement, every crossroads where two people seem to be at odds, there exists something powerful just beneath the surface, a third alternative, not your way, not their way, but a better way, one that neither of you may have thought of yet. It's not a compromise where both sides give up something and walk away partially dissatisfied. It's not a surrender where one side wins and the other loses. It's a genuine creative solution that honors the core needs and values of everyone involved. The problem is, most people never get to the third alternative. They get stuck fighting over whose way is better, instead of stepping back to ask, is there something better than either of our ways? We are trained from an early age to think in binaries, right or wrong, win or lose, success or failure. And so, when a disagreement arises, our first instinct is to defend our position. We become attached to our solution, our process, our logic. We assume that if the other person gets their way, we'll lose something. That assumption turns us into competitors. But synergy requires that we stop seeing each other as opponents and start seeing each other as collaborators. It requires that we pause the argument long enough to ask, what are we really trying to achieve here? What matters most to each of us? And what might we create together that honors both? I once worked with a city planning committee that was completely deadlocked. Half the members wanted to expand the freeway system to reduce traffic congestion. The other half were environmentalists who wanted to invest in public transportation to cut emissions. For months, the meetings were battles. Accusations flew. Each side accused the other of being short-sighted or irresponsible. But when we got down to the core of their values, something different emerged. The first group valued efficiency, mobility, and economic growth. The second valued sustainability, health, and future generations. When those deeper values were finally voiced, not just the surface solutions, people began to listen differently. And then someone asked the question that changed the game. What if we stopped arguing over cars vs. trains and started designing a system that moves people quickly and protects the environment? That question opened the door to creativity. They brought in designers, urban planners, and local citizens. What emerged was a hybrid model, a smart transportation system that included light rail, electric buses, bike infrastructure, and limited road expansions that prioritized shared vehicles. It wasn't a compromise. It was a solution no one had seen before. A third alternative that met the real goals of both sides. The same principle applies in our personal lives. A father wants his daughter to go into a stable profession. She wants to pursue art. They argue. They defend. Tension builds. But underneath the surface, the father is really saying, I want to know you'll be okay, that you'll be secure. And the daughter is really saying, I want to live a life that's true to who I am. When they get to those core needs, security and authenticity, they can begin to create a solution. Maybe it's an art school with business training. Maybe it's starting part-time while holding a job. Maybe it's something neither of them had imagined, but they won't find it until they stop pulling on the rope and start building something new. One of the reasons we struggle to find third alternatives is because we're conditioned to equate disagreement with disrespect. We think, if you don't agree with me, you don't value me. But the opposite is often true. Real respect says, I care enough about you to bring my full self into this conversation. I care enough about us to be honest about what I see, and I'm willing to listen to what you see too. That's the beginning of synergy. That's where the third way lies. It takes humility to admit that your way might not be the only way. It takes courage to explore ideas that feel unfamiliar, and it takes imagination to create solutions where none seem to exist. But when you do, something extraordinary happens. The relationship strengthens. The trust deepens. And what you create together becomes bigger than either of you could have created alone. This week, I want you to try something powerful. Take a current disagreement, whether at work or at home, and write down your ideal solution. Then write down theirs. Now ask yourself, what's really behind each of these solutions? What values or fears or hopes are being expressed? And finally ask, what might a third alternative look like? One that meets both of your needs in a new and creative way. You don't have to come up with the perfect answer right away. You just have to start looking for it. Because the moment you stop arguing over positions and start exploring shared purpose, you open the door to real synergy. You stop settling for either, and begin creating something greater than both. One of the greatest missteps we make in relationships, teams, and leadership is focusing too much on weaknesses instead of building on strengths. We become fixated on fixing people, correcting flaws, and patching up what's wrong with them. But synergy, the real, powerful kind, doesn't happen by obsessing over deficits. It happens when we start recognizing, respecting, and multiplying strengths. It's about seeing people not as problems to be solved, but as unique contributors to a greater whole. It's about changing the lens we use to look at ourselves and others. When we start asking, what's strong with you? Instead of, what's wrong with you? We begin to unlock exponential potential. We've all had moments in life where we felt diminished, labeled, or boxed in by our weaknesses. Maybe it was a teacher who told you you weren't focused enough. A boss who saw you as too emotional. A partner who thought you talked too much. These moments leave scars. But what if those very traits weren't weaknesses, just strengths misapplied or misunderstood? The child who's too talkative might be a future communicator, a speaker, a storyteller. The employee who's too emotional might be deeply empathetic, a future counselor, a culture builder. The team member who's too slow might be thoughtful, deliberate, and excellent at avoiding costly mistakes. Strengths often show up in the rough before they're polished. And if all we do is try to sand down the edges, we may lose the very brilliance that synergy requires. I worked once with a company that was struggling with productivity in one of its departments. The manager had a well-meaning approach, identify each employee's weakness and assign them a mentor to fix it. On paper, it seemed logical. But morale plummeted. People felt scrutinized, not empowered. They became defensive, withdrawn. So we tried something different. We brought in a strengths-based assessment. We mapped out what each person naturally did well. Suddenly, the team saw itself in a new light. The introvert who had struggled in brainstorming sessions was brilliant at analyzing data behind the scenes. The team member who was disorganized but charming was put in charge of client relationships. Tasks were realigned to match people's natural talents. The result? Productivity went up. Turnover went down. And perhaps most importantly, people felt seen. Not for what they lacked, but for what they could bring. Synergy requires this shift. It asks us to stop demanding uniformity and start celebrating diversity, not just of culture or background, but of mindset, energy, and strength. Every person brings a different piece to the puzzle. And when we try to force everyone into the same mold, we lose the picture entirely. Imagine a symphony where everyone tries to play the same note, the same way at the same time. That's not harmony, that's noise. But when each instrument plays its own part, guided by the same vision, you get music. Beautiful, powerful music. That's synergy. I saw this principle come alive in a school that had a student who struggled academically, but had an incredible ability to organize people and lead. He wasn't the best test taker. He wasn't a straight A student, but he could get a group of students to rally behind a cause, run events, and solve conflicts in the hallway before the teachers even noticed. At first, the school tried to make him fit the academic mold. Tutors, extra homework, constant pressure. It only made him withdraw. But one day, a counselor decided to shift the approach. She asked him to help lead a school initiative on bullying prevention. His energy changed overnight. He showed up early, stayed late, and got more done in a week than most students did in a month. His confidence returned. His grades improved. All because someone chose to build on his strengths rather than constantly remind him of his weaknesses. This approach doesn't just apply to how we treat others. It starts with how we treat ourselves. Too many people walk around defined by their flaws. They believe they're not smart enough, not disciplined enough, not creative enough. But what if your flaw is just a strength misaligned? What if, instead of constantly trying to fix yourself, you started maximizing what you already do well? Confidence doesn't come from perfection. It comes from knowing your strengths and showing up in the world with them on full display. This week, take inventory. Ask yourself, what are my top 3 strengths? Where do I naturally thrive, energize others, and produce results? Then ask the same about someone in your life, your teammate, your partner, your child. Not what's wrong with them, not what they need to fix, but what they do well. Then find a way to speak it, use it, build on it. Because when you build on strengths, you don't just create better results, you create better people, stronger teams, deeper trust. And that is the soil where synergy grows. Synergy cannot exist without trust. It is the very foundation on which all collaboration is built. Without it, relationships become guarded, teams become fragmented, and communication becomes surface level at best. You can have the most brilliant people in the room, the most creative minds, and the most detailed plans, but if trust is absent, true synergy will never emerge. Trust is the soil in which shared vision, mutual respect, and cooperative energy take root and grow. It's not a luxury, it's a necessity, and it starts with one person choosing to show up with honesty, consistency, and vulnerability. When you trust someone, you give them access to your real thoughts, your real fears, and your real dreams. And when that trust is mutual, something extraordinary begins to happen. Walls fall. Ideas flow. People feel safe enough to be themselves and bold enough to stretch beyond what they thought was possible. I remember a senior leadership team that had gone through a rough year. Missed targets, personnel shakeups, and internal conflict had left scars. There was tension in every meeting. People said all the right things, but you could feel the fear in the room. No one wanted to be the first to speak honestly. No one wanted to take a risk. The CEO sensed it and brought me in, not to fix a strategy, but to rebuild trust. We started with simple exercises, personal stories, honest conversations, shared vulnerabilities. Slowly, people started to open up. One executive shared how afraid he had been of letting the team down. Another admitted she had been withholding ideas out of fear of rejection. When those truths were spoken, something cracked open. You could see shoulders drop, eyes soften. The team didn't suddenly become perfect, but they became real. And from that realness came connection. From connection came ideas. And from those ideas came solutions that had been hiding under the surface, waiting for a safe place to emerge. Trust doesn't come from perfection. It comes from consistency and sincerity. It's built in small moments. When someone follows through on a promise, when someone admits a mistake without blaming others, when someone chooses honesty over ego, and it can be lost just as quickly. One broken word, one betrayal, one instance of self-protection over group well-being, and the foundation starts to crack. But the good news is that trust, while fragile, is also rebuildable. It takes intention. It takes time. But it is possible. We often think of trust as something that either exists or doesn't, like a switch. But it's more like a bank account. Every act of integrity is a deposit. Every broken promise is a withdrawal. And when the balance is high, teams take risks. People speak up. Collaboration flows. But when the balance is low, everything becomes a negotiation. People withhold. Progress slows. Fear creeps in. Synergy dies in environments where people feel they have to constantly protect themselves. That's why great leaders obsess over building trust. They don't just care about what gets done. They care about how it gets done and who feels safe doing it. This principle applies at home too. In a family, trust is the difference between open dialogue and silent resentment, between children who confide in their parents and children who hide from them, between spouses who grow together and those who drift apart. I once worked with a couple on the brink of divorce. The love was still there, but the trust had eroded. Little lies, half-truths, defensive reactions, years of unspoken disappointment. But when they finally sat down and looked each other in the eye, no blame, no posturing, just truth. It was like watching walls collapse. They didn't solve everything in one conversation, but they rebuilt the most important thing, belief in each other's good intentions. That belief allowed them to start fresh, not from where they had been, but from where they could go next. If you want synergy, you have to be willing to go first. Be the one who tells the truth even when it's hard. Be the one who admits when you're wrong. Be the one who follows through on the small things. Be the one who creates safety in the room just by how you show up. Trust is contagious. When one person steps forward with integrity and humility, others follow. That's how it starts. That's how it spreads. And that's how synergy is born. This week, reflect on your relationships, at work, at home, in your community. Ask yourself, where is trust high? Where is it low? And more importantly, what can you do to raise the level? Maybe it's a conversation you've been avoiding. Maybe it's an apology you've been resisting. Maybe it's simply showing up more consistently for the people who count on you. Trust is not built in grand gestures. It's built in the everyday choices we make to show up with honesty, respect, and care. When we do, we don't just build trust. We build teams, we build families, we build communities, and that is the foundation where synergy thrives. Synergy is not a one-time event. It's not something that happens in a flash of inspiration and then sustains itself indefinitely. It's a habit, a way of thinking, a daily choice. Too many people experience synergy once, on a retreat, in a team breakthrough, during a powerful conversation, and then wonder why it fades. The truth is, synergy must be nurtured. It must be practiced intentionally like any other discipline. You don't become a master of communication, collaboration, or connection by accident. You build it day by day, choice by choice, habit by habit. And when you do, synergy stops being a miracle and starts being a lifestyle. It's easy to be synergistic when things are going well, when the stakes are low, when everyone is calm. But the real test comes in the tension, when there's stress, when the pressure is on, when someone pushes your buttons. That's when the habit shows itself. Do you default to control, to winning, to being right? Or do you reach for curiosity, openness, and shared creation? Your answer in those moments isn't about personality. It's about practice. Just like athletes train for the game, so their instincts serve them under pressure. We train ourselves to synergize so our responses build connection rather than break it. I once coached a CEO who had a brilliant mind but struggled to build trust with his executive team. His ideas were solid, his strategy was sound, but his people were disengaged. When we began working together, I noticed that he rarely asked for input. He didn't mean to shut others down. He simply thought faster than most and was used to carrying the weight. When I asked him why he didn't involve his team more, he said, "I don't want to slow things down." But what he didn't see was that his speed was costing him synergy. People felt like passengers, not partners. So we worked on one habit. Just one. At every meeting before making a decision, he would pause and ask two people to speak first. It felt small, but the impact was massive. His team began to open up, their thinking sharpened. His own decisions improved. And gradually a culture of collaboration replaced a culture of hierarchy. Not because of a speech or a retreat, but because of a repeated choice to slow down and listen. In families, the same principle applies. Synergy doesn't just happen on vacations or during family dinners. It happens in the daily rituals. The way you greet each other in the morning, the tone you use when giving feedback, the consistency of your follow-through. It's in the weekly check-ins, the simple questions, the shared goals. I once worked with a family who had drifted apart emotionally. Everyone was busy. Communication had become transactional. Love was there, but it wasn't being expressed. So I gave them a simple practice, a weekly family meeting. 15 minutes. Each person could share one win, one struggle, and one hope. At first it felt awkward, forced, but they stuck with it. And after a few weeks, the conversations deepened. The laughter returned. Connection was rekindled, not because they had resolved every issue, but because they had created space, a habit, where understanding could grow. We often look for big moments to change our lives, but synergy is built in the small ones. It's in choosing to ask one more question, to listen 1 minute longer, to reframe conflict as opportunity, to schedule time for reflection, brainstorming, celebration. Teams that synergize regularly don't wait for crisis to talk deeply. They embed collaboration into their routines. They have processes for feedback. They celebrate diverse thinking. They check in with one another. And because of that, they are resilient. They adapt. They innovate. They thrive. You don't need permission to start a synergy habit. You just need intention. Decide today what habit you will create to build connection. Maybe it's a 10-minute debrief at the end of your work week. Maybe it's a monthly lunch with your spouse to dream about the future. Maybe it's a simple question you ask your team before every meeting. What do you see that I might not? Whatever it is, make it consistent. Let it become a rhythm. Because what we do repeatedly, we become. If you build synergy into your habits, synergy will shape your culture. And as you do this, don't wait for others to go first. Be the one who brings the energy of cooperation. Be the one who initiates, the one who invites. Synergy doesn't require titles, budgets, or perfect conditions. It requires people, willing people, who choose to connect, to co-create, to reach beyond what's easy and build what's extraordinary. One habit at a time, one conversation at a time, one choice at a time. That's how synergy becomes not just an outcome, but a way of life.